5 or 6 years, this whole process of trying to figure out how to create more availability and affordability in housing. And one of the ways that they've looked at it is by how do we increase density so that we can get more units per acre, those kinds of things. And as I've said last week on the show, hosting or subbing for Keith Smith, man, and it's 40-some degrees. I wish I was in St. Martin right now. I guess he's on his way home soon, but a couple days. But anyway, I said last week, everybody's intentions are good. And Roy Van Doren, who's our guest today, he was on my show a couple weeks ago, and we both agreed that the intentions of everybody are really good, that we're trying to figure out how do we make more housing available, how do we make housing more affordable, and that's where it breaks. There are people that believe that the new zoning ordinance proposal is really good and it's going to do all these wonderful things. And then there are people that feel strongly that they're not. Roy being in that camp, and he's spent a lot of time and energy, researching this, being a part of it, communicating with people. And quite honestly, Roy doesn't know this, but Neil Williamson, who's a guest on this show on freeenterpriseforum.org, communicated with me when I told him that Roy was going to be on the show, and he felt like your presentation at the December 5th meeting was one of the most, in 2 minutes, informable and reasonably, dialogued as any. So Roy and I met through me being in the neighborhood that he lives in. And I've read his stuff, and I just felt like, people need to know that there are two sides of every equation. And over these last few weeks, that's what I've tried to do with whatever, status I have in this town, whatever, sphere of influence I have in this town.
Yeah.
That's what I've tried to do. I've tried to, let people know that there's two sides, this including the people that are going to be making these decisions.
So Roy Van Doren, guys, is going to join us on the program. We'll get that intro ready to rock and roll. I've heard this man speak before City Council a number of times. To say he's thorough and prepared is an understatement. And I echo what he said. It's important to hear both sides of the perspective here. J-Dubs, we can rock and roll and start that intro when you're ready. Guys, welcome to Real Talk with Keith Smith. My name is Jerry Miller. Thank you kindly for joining us. We are live in downtown Charlottesville, guys, on a Monday. Keith Smith on vacation in sunny St. Martin. We wake up to 25 degrees in Keswick, and Keith is lounging on a beach, recharging with his family. Props to him. Keith, it's quite chilly here in Charlottesville and in Central Virginia. Today's guest is a gentleman that has become a household name when it's come to upzoning and it's come to density and it's come to the draft zoning ordinance. To say we're at the bottom of the ninth inning is an understatement. A lot of political prognosticators have indicated that this vote could happen as soon as the next meeting. A version of upzoning will be approved. Which version, time will tell. I think it's important, and what we've tried to do on this network, what Michael Guthrie, the award-winning broadcaster, does on Real Estate Matters, is offer perspective on both sides of the fence. A well-informed political ecosystem is a better ecosystem because it leads to more engagement at the civic and local level. So we'll offer that perspective with a man and that I think you guys already know. I certainly have followed him. Local stakeholder Roy Van Doren. Judah Wickhauer is our director. If we can go to the studio camera and then a 3-shot and welcome Michael Guthrie, who's sitting in the hot seat for Keith Smith. This guy's an absolute pro. And you set up this interview, and I'm very grateful for you setting up Roy Van Doren on set today.
Yeah, I'm excited about Roy as well, and quite honestly, I tried to have somebody from the other side of the equation as it relates to the zoning ordinance proposal that, like you said, I think will get voted on by the end of the year. I've talked to a number of the stakeholders, and they're saying, we want to get this done. Quite honestly, and Roy and I have had this candid conversation, counting the noses. It is the bottom of the ninth. for sure, and probably 2 outs with 2 strikes. But the point being is, it's not too late to continue to engage and to have people, when they're voting on this, understand that there are other things that need to be considered, right? And as I say on my show all the time, what we want to do is we want to educate people so that they can make a good decision on their own, for their own reasons, right? And that's what we're trying to do here. And the CAR leaders, CAR came out in support of this proposal and would have loved to have had one of the leaders, but a bunch of them are in Richmond today, so couldn't be there, and several other people that I reached out to. It just didn't work out. But we want to have, and I will be talking about both aspects of this, because I think that's really, really important. But the reason I wanted Roy to come on the show is that Roy has done his homework. Roy has, in the old Young Life days, maybe in the first Young Life area director here in Charlottesville, Roy's earned the right to be heard, right? He's walked the walk before he's talked the talk in regards to being around Charlottesville for a long time, being involved in a lot of the visitor type of things that make this city great, this community great, Central Virginia great. But this is a passion for him, and he's spent his time and written a number of white papers encouraging people along the way, and speaking strongly about how he feels, but in a very reasonable and compassionate way, a way that everybody has respected, whether they agree with him or disagree with him.
Well said. Roy, why don't we take a moment and introduce yourself to the viewers and listeners? Maybe before we talk upzoning, just give them some insight into what Charlottesville means to you, how long you've been here, and why you care so much about this community.
Well, thank you, Jerry. I moved here in 1990 and moved here by choice from California. I wanted to have a great school system for my kids. We moved to Albemarle County, and it's been 2 of my kids went to UVA. I've got deep roots in the community all these years. 4 years ago, I bought a property in downtown. I moved from the county to the city and have really enjoyed being a citizen of the city. The neighborhood's great, people are great, and that is why I'm so passionate about this. I work in the visitor community. I do visitor marketing for a wide scope, from UVA to the winery industry to Monticello, and you name it. And we have a great community here, and I'd like to see it continue as a great community for all people. But the proposal that has been put forward by the Planning Commission through their consultants and now has been moved to the City Council for ratification, it's kind of like a bait and switch, honestly, because what was first proposed was we have some challenges with housing costs. It costs too much for a family or a couple to live in Charlottesville, and it's that is a challenge that we look at just within our community. But I think Michael and you both know that it isn't just Charlottesville that has this problem, and there's some other issues that drive affordability, like the cost of money, and we think about it in home loans, but if you're a developer, you're borrowing money, if you can get it, at 10%. And if you're trying to do some speculative building or building anything of scale, banks, especially small regional banks, they're just not interested in working because they can't for a variety of reasons. And that trickles down to the cost of homes, cost of development, and this plan really can't address those issues.
I'll throw this to Michael. This is how I highlighted this, and we try to do the same thing that Michael does on Real Estate Matters, is look at things from both sides of the fence, offer both perspectives, and you have it might be down the middle in this community, where half the community is so pro-upzoning, and the other half of the community is frankly vehemently opposed to it. And it's been going on for so long that this topic has got momentum, and it's got It's in our crawls. It's stuck in our minds because it's been happening for years. I'll throw this to Michael. My take is when you make the land more opportunistic, and by opportunistic, I mean you can do more things with the land. It's going to cause the land value to appreciate in value and become more costly. And when land is more costly because you can add more houses or more units, more income streams to it, at the same time that the interest rate environment is fairly high, the cost of goods environment is fairly high, there's a labor shortage which makes the active labor expensive, it's going to yield housing product that's expensive. You got expensive land and housing product, and the folks that are going to be able to afford to do these types of projects are folks that are fairly sophisticated businessmen and businesswomen, and they're going to be looking at things from an ROI standpoint. And while we may have a looser zoning code that does create more density, that's not to say that density that is created is going to become affordable. Throw it to you on that.
Yeah, so that's where I come from in regards to the fact that I absolutely am in support of doing things that increase availability and affordability. I think that there are ways that it can be done. At the same time, where I would push back on you, Jerry, in regards to that is I think it can be done the other way. And just as a simple math, PE major, kind of math, if I have $1 million property, right, and I can change that property into 4 units, instead of it being a detached home, which, a lot of people, that's what they're talking about, is that, the detached homes limit the ability to create more units. So if I take that $1 million property, and again, simple math, and I put 4 units in there, well, now I have 4 $250,000 units, which people can afford, right? Or some people can afford. The problem that you have is it's not that simple. So you're right, it could increase the value, the appreciation, which you're not really hearing a lot. You hear me say it a bunch. I'm concerned about neighbors as well, that if you're right and those things appreciate, then their taxes are going to go up. That wasn't something that they chose. Somebody chose it for them, but all of a sudden they're paying more real estate taxes than they were before. But the point I'm making is it can be done. I was in Houston a few years ago. Dear friend of mine had a heart transplant, and Dottie went down and spent 2 weeks with her, and I went down and spent some time, and we were walking down the street, much like, say, Locust Avenue or Park Street, and these really cool old houses there. And I realized about halfway down the street that they weren't single-family homes. They were 4 or 5 units that had different interests in the house, but the streetscape didn't change. It went, from the detached house to these houses, and you didn't really feel that it happened, right? And so for me, that's, kind of what I've been thinking and talking about for the last 3 years is why can't there be more of that versus in these zoning proposals having a home that's been there for 50, 60 years and now having a 3-story apartment building next door, for lack of a better explanation, apartment building. The streetscape is going to change, and therefore the lifestyle, the aesthetic value of it. And so in some ways, the property value could go down in that situation. Somebody that's in the 60-year-old house that they fixed up and it's selling at a current rate of X, if all of a sudden they've got an apartment next door, there's, again, simple, right? For every 10 buyers that look at my house, if I have it on the market, I want every one of those 10 buyers to say, this is the house I want to buy. If I have that, then I have demand, which means I'm going to get the best price with the best terms, right? In a situation where there's a property next to me where there's 3 or 4 different people now looking into my backyard, out of those 10, maybe 5, maybe 4, maybe 7, whatever it is, it's not 10 anymore.
No,
right?
It's not
and then
10.
The second part, and then because I know you've got something to say there, the second part of this is as it relates to the affordability part of this, that the city wants to have at least 1 unit, or 10% of the units being at AMI, area median income. And folks, please understand that AMI is different in every locale. It's not the same. So don't look at a national scenario and put it to Charlottesville, because it's not like that, or vice versa. Don't use Charlottesville and someplace else. But my point being is, if you have even 10 units And one of them is, because it's 10%, has to be sold at a lower affordable price. Nobody can say to me that those other 9 aren't going to be priced higher to offset what the builder and developer had to do with that other unit. Not that doing that isn't a good idea, but that goes back to your point, Jerry, is that that's what pushes the price up on these others, which makes the other 9 not affordable
Right.
to other people.
And we have a visual, and I'll pass it to Roy. I could tell you were itching to get to this visual here. Judah Wickhauer is going to cue up a visual. You be the Al Michaels and offer the play-by-play of what we're about to see. He's going to give you a thumbs up when those visuals are on screen. First, set the stage of what's happening.
Well, I use my own house as an example. It's public knowledge of where I live because it just is.
It's a beautiful Cape Cod.
Yeah, it is. And I rebuilt it. And
I'd screen in the porch if I were you.
yeah, it is a nice. We have a couple of porches, and it's really a beautiful neighborhood. And I moved there by choice, and we have neighbors. It's Rugby Avenue, and Rugby Avenue is a lot like Locust and Park, and a lot of the bigger major streets that were major streets 70 years ago. And the houses are 70 years
Yeah,
ago.
yeah.
Because when this was built, and the neighborhood that Michael and I live in, that was the outskirts of town. There was no bypass. This was out in the middle of, it was on the edge of town. And so this was the major east-west road that went from Free Bridge to UVA. And so when you have a major road, it's like living on 29 back then. They didn't put the houses right on the sidewalk. They set it back for the road noise and everything else. And so we have quite a big front yard, and just similar to like Locust and Park and some of the other streets here in Charlottesville. And so now the city has created or is proposing to create a zone called RC, which is the most intensive residential. Initially, the Planning Commission had proposed it include commercial in the neighborhoods. The City Council has now
Walk that back.
walked it back a little bit.
Lloyd Snook has led that charge.
Yeah, and I have to thank him for that, and I think the other councilors understand that that's just a little too much and too hard because the community needs to absorb what is being proposed, and that was just like one too many bricks to carry. What, though, has been proposed by the Planning Commission and the City Council has seemingly adopted is the idea that on the second slide you will see a 12-unit apartment complex put next to my home. Now, is this kind of extreme? It is, but this is perfectly legitimate. And as Michael said,
I'm not sure it's extreme.
No.
It's a possibility.
Well, and this is actually a development in Albemarle County. So it's what happens is if somebody's going to buy a tear down next to another home, they're going to try to maximize their investment. As it changes from residential to commercial. In the commercial situation, you have to maximize your return. So they're not interested in a fourplex because that lot is 4/10 of an acre. They can maximize it, this new setting. All the parking can be out on the street. It can be put 4 feet from your side lot. So as a builder, as an investor, as a developer, you'll want to maximize your investment and you want to wring out every dollar that you can. And sometimes it may include, like you said, Michael, it might have an affordability component to it, and you agree that you're going to do it at a certain percentage of AMI. So now everything gets pretty expensive, and they have to maximize the lot.
Let me ask you this question, very pointed question. Then Michael, I'll adapt to you guys here. If you put slide 1 on screen and then flip from slide 1 to slide 2, slide 1 is how it currently looks right now. Judy, you got that on there? Okay, everyone, this is where Roy lives now. This is what it currently looks like. Put slide 2 on screen if you could. If slide 2 becomes a reality, do you list your house and move?
I would try to list it before.
You would list
got
it
built,
before. Yeah.
Because It also changes the financial issue. Now that you've converted residential, single-family dwelling residential to mixed commercial and residential, the appraiser, and he said this publicly, that now the utility of that land is worth so much more.
Definitely.
Because now you can put 12 units on it instead of one. And I get that. And
You know where we're really seeing this? And Michael, I'll pass it to you. Ludwig Kutner and Alan Kajin own Ix Park. And at Ix Park, they're being taxed on the potential of what that 17 acres could be and not what that 17 acres is today, which is an art park and kind of a retail center. They're being taxed on the potential of apartments and or condos there. So I've spoken with Ludwig many times about this. The tax bill is obscene versus the rent rolls that are currently being brought in their current form.
Yeah, I mean, and Roy and I have talked about this, and maybe I'm a little Pollyanna here, but in all honesty, I don't see this building being built next to Roy's house. I understand where he's coming from, and that the zoning, the way it's set up, it could allow it, but I think this is the kind of thing that even by right, City Planning Commission, things like that. Now, again, you go down Rose Hill Drive, and a building has recently been built that people use as sort of this is what it could look like. I think what the mayor has done, in regards to this other aspect of it, has kind of quelled that concern. But one of the things that, and so going back to what you said, the taxes, right? It's already been something. It's something I've been talking about for years about, somebody comes in and they knock down a house and they build a $1.2 million house on it because they want to live and walk to Charlottesville. People that have lived there for years and years, and maybe their family has lived there for a generation or two, are now put in a situation where their house is valued at more for the potential. And I think, we talk about affordable, right? Those folks may not be able to afford the real estate taxes, right? And then people say, yeah, but they could sell their house for so much money. Well, where are they going to go? This is their home. This is their community. Nothing against Louisa, nothing against Nelson, nothing against Fluvanna or Green. Let me name them all so I don't leave anybody out. Being part of that, that's not where they're from. That's not where they've grown up and that kind of thing. And so I would like to see some conversations going on as it relates to, I know there are some tax relief situations that are in the city now, but I just think that, and what I've said before is I'd love to see something grandfathered, that these are my taxes. Use Ludwig for a minute. This is my taxes in regards to when I bought it and what my use is on it and everything. And if somebody comes and buys my 17 acres for $1 jillion, we'll let that person pay the taxes on the $1 jillion, not me on the potential of it, right? And so, from my perspective, that's another part of this equation, that the data, and there are white papers written, and the thing is, folks, you need to understand this zoning, upzoning, downzoning, whatever you want to call it. Again, I want to say again that this is all, everybody's intentions are good here, right? We all want to create affordable housing. We want to have more housing availability. We got this morning at Pancakes for Breakfast. People can't, I'll have to hold it up here, but Pancakes for Breakfast at the CAR meeting, and few of the state senators and delegates were there, and they handed out this book, which was great. It's called On Common Ground, Zoning Innovation. The realtors are very much for property rights and using getting the best use out of property rights. And I think that's why the Realtor Association came out in support of this. I just feel like there's still data. It's still too soon. A couple white papers that I read talked about, yes, what we're seeing is availability and affordability, but it's still too early to tell. More research needs to be done. And so from my standpoint, and I don't think it's going to happen, but if the pause button could be pushed to get some of these answers, and going back to where I was going with this in the first place, there's a chance in Roy's neighborhood on Rugby Avenue that you're only going to be able to park on one side of the street, right? That all these, the logistics and the infrastructure and the travel sort of thought process, going back to what we talked a little bit about last week, Jerry, in regards to the 10-story building over at at
Ivy, the
thank you.
Truist site.
Ivy and Massett, yeah,
Yep.
the Truist site. The reason that got tabled is because they didn't have a transportation study done yet as to what that was going to be for that many people. I'm not going to mention names, but there's some people out there that, in my opinion, I don't know where they think that somebody on Lewis Mountain Road or somebody on Rugby Avenue is going to all of a sudden start walking or Ubering to Barracks Road because they don't need that car anymore. That I just think that I understand.
That's not realistic.
It's a wonderful thing to think about, but
Yeah.
it's not realistic.
Right.
And if you bring in even half of what's shown in this picture,
Yeah.
that's several more cars on that site. And if one of the ways we're going to do that is we're only going to park on one side of the street, these other folks, when we talk about property rights, this is the way they bought the house and that kind of thing. And I loved Roy's example of this, although I think most of the folks have driveways so that they could do this. But he was talking about how crazy would it be that here we are trying to save energy, and we've got all these electric cars, and people are having to, have their extension cord go across Rugby Avenue to plug it into their car.
You said that
right?
before City Council.
Yeah.
Right. And so, most of those, in all honesty, realistically, most of those have driveways. But
Sure.
it's a great point, that all of a sudden that's an inconvenience to people who have been able to park in front of their house and now can't, And so anyway, there are just a lot of different things. And I know City Council has spent a lot of time on this. I know they had I think part of the problem with this is a lot of the first couple, 3 years of this was in COVID. And so a lot of this, got done and talked about and stuff, and then all of a sudden it was out there. Again, give them the benefit of the doubt. It's been another 2 or 3 years. I just feel like there's data that still needs to be, sort of investigated and substantiated.
We will get Roy in the mix. We got an appraiser watching the program, Woody Fitcham. Woody Fitcham has a comment for us. He says, statutes require valuing the real estate at its highest and best use. Municipalities cannot tax in-use value. If you own something that has a different highest or best use than its current use, then you have your deal with it. That being said, most assessment offices are out of their booth when it comes to supportable highest and best use. So he's talking about assessing land on highest and best use or potential, if you may.
That's the Kootenai example.
Yeah, it is the
exactly.
Kootenai
And it's going to shift to residential. And speaking of zoning, David Brown and David Toscano spoke at
Former mayors.
Yeah, both former mayors,
Yeah.
and several prior city council members have talked to me privately. And I think everybody is of the same concern, is that when, and I'm speaking primarily of RA, RB, and RC, which is the residential component, that if the city decides to do a fairly aggressive, and I mean aggressive being probably the highest transference from R1 to any place in the country, if you upzone to RB or RC, and it doesn't work out, and in good intentions, everything was great, but it doesn't work out, going backwards is almost impossible. It's like you let the horse out of the corral, and once that horse is gone, you can't bring it back. And that is the problem that we have and that's one of the concerns that both David Brown and David Toscano mentioned was, we're not in a race here. This is a long-term process. The city council has said this is a living document, we can adjust it. Yes, some parts you might, but once you've now declared something to be eligible for five stories, you can't the next year say, well, we're going to change that to a 2-story or 3-story, because now you're really opening yourself up for a lot of big lawsuits.
There's so much I want to cover with you guys here. Go ahead, Michael.
Let me just piggyback on what Roy just said. The reason you can't do that is listening to Keith's show, you and Jerry, Keith and Jerry doing the show. One of the things we talk about all the time is how long it takes from the time you buy a piece of land to the time you get it to an actual use, right? And part of that is because, for a lot of different things, but one of the reasons is because the city has been slow they're better. I think Sam Sanders is doing a great job of trying to engage people and get things, moving forward. Every time I've reached out to him about everything, he's been very responsive and says he's going to look into it, and he does, right? I'm grateful for that. But if let's just say it's 3 years, 4 years. Okay, we have this plan, it gets approved. Somebody buys this piece of property next to Roy, using that as our hypothetical, right? And they start working toward a 5-story building, and then 2 years from now say, oh, now you can only do a 3. Well, that 5 stories is going to have to be grandfathered, right? It's because that's the way it was set up. But on the other side of that, and one of the things I've been communicating with the vice mayor about is I get the fact, I count the noses, I understand what's going on. But can you please, in whatever you approve, can you put these safety nets in? Can you put in actual, into the language that we're going to review this at such and such a time, and at such and such a time things can be changed? Not what you've already agreed to and got approved, but things beyond that. And then secondly, is it Jim Freeze?
Oh, yeah.
James Freeze.
James
James
Freeze.
Freeze.
Sorry. James Freeze.
Neighborhood Development Services.
Yeah, so he has been very, publicly noted that this is not going to be the last zoning thing that we work with, and that he communicates it's going to be dynamic, and that we're going to work on this and whatever. I get that, but to say it in 2023 versus in 2024 or 25 when the data doesn't prove out to be what they thought it to be, I just think and Roy, you tell me if I'm wrong on this because you're on that side of the equation, I just think it quells some people's concerns if they can see that the city council's, is understanding that they're probably going to need to be changes made to this, whether it's because of transportation or whatever, and that they're actually built in on how you do that versus we've got this and then we got to do this for another 6 years to get another change.
Well, I think one of the common themes by a lot of people that have spoken at both the Planning Commission public hearing and also the City Council public hearing, the single opportunity the community really has to voice their opinion other than in writing, is let's start with a good plan that encourages infill development, but on a smaller scale. Let's walk before we run, and then learn what we can from doing ADU development. Make it easy, and then also incorporate, rather than in RA, which is the current lowest intensity use of property, there's really not a mechanism that encourages people to consider affordable housing. Again, if I'm going to build a second home behind my home, I'm going to rent it out at market rate because it's an expensive thing. But if the city could come forward with some incentives to help people with concierge service or pre-approved ADU units or a tax freeze or something that on the utility side that makes it work, people will come out and say, I could build an ADU in my backyard.
Have you seen the cost of the ADU constructions?
Oh, it's not
a couple $100,000 plus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the problem is that if I want to build an ADU at my house, either I have to have cash in my hand, or generally speaking, people have to remortgage their house.
Yeah.
And who wants to do that now? I'm sitting on a 3% loan. Do I want to go get a 7.5% loan to fund a $250,000 development in my backyard? Probably not.
Well, start planning now because 2025 the interest rate will probably be in the 5s. So
Michael Buchenski, First Heritage Mortgage, said on Friday's show that he expects the rates to be in the mid-5s this year.
Fantastic.
This year?
Or in 2024. I mean, we're at the end of 23.
Wow.
In 2024, Michael Buchenski says mid-5s, 2024.
Did he put money on that?
He said mark it down.
Did he really?
Yeah. Spoke with confidence.
Well, that's great. But I think the city could do something and scale it back a little bit, walk before we run. NDS is still way understaffed.
Big time.
For planners, plan review. You know how long it takes to get a plan review. It's just incredibly long. And I know that the NDS has been so involved with this comp plan review that everything kind of water just keeps going down the river where they're not taking care of business day to day. James is doing a good job.
Yeah, he's doing the best he can with what he has.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And you know,
yeah.
the city is still over 100 people short of a full-staffed city employment. So I know that there's some challenges there, and that is exactly why I'm advocating come up with something like RA for the entire city for single family. You can still potentially triple the size of Charlottesville with RA, and then maybe in 2 years, 4 years, like you say, Michael, at that point, say, what did we learn? We haven't blew up the neighborhoods. We've built some things that are different, but not blown them up. And then we say, okay, now that maybe we'll have a bus system that works better than it does now. I mean, there's a lot of things that are missing from this equation for implementation.
So much I want to cover with you guys, and I want to cover the both sides of the coin here.
Sure.
And you would be a fantastic guy to throw the supply and demand topic to proponents of upzoning.
Sure.
Highlight the old adage, supply and demand. If you increase housing supply, it could breed price stability or stabilizing prices because there's more options for the market to choose from. Folks have even taken it a step further. Even if additional supply comes at the top of the price spectrum, those that are owners or those that are wealthy can go after the top of the price spectrum, which opens up the price spectrum right below that, and the one right below that, and right below that, because there's less competition on the pricing pyramid, if you may. So we need to cover both sides, to be fair here. We also should highlight what I'm seeing with a lot of city residents. Streets are galvanizing together to put covenants and restrictions on their houses, essentially creating mini HOAs on their streets in the cities. We should highlight that topic. And thirdly, I think what could happen, as an Albemarle County resident in an HOA neighborhood, I would think that as this continues to go down the pipe, the HOA neighborhoods around the urban ring and in Albemarle County are going to see even more value proposition because those covenants and restrictions for those respective neighborhoods prevent this from potentially happening, and there's still a large portion of the population that wants the white picket fence and the backyard and the front yard and wants not much noise, and they want peace and quiet in their respective neighborhoods. So why don't I throw it to Michael to start here. The other side, the supply and demand, and those that are in favor of this upzoning concept.
Well, supply and demand, anybody that went to UVA at some point went through Dr. Elzinga's class. And that's where we all learned supply and demand.
That's right.
And I was watching a video of him the other day where he talked about, what was it, decreasing margins. And he uses the analogy of having a child and every hour giving the child some ice cream. And slowly but surely, as the day goes along, she doesn't want the ice cream anymore because she got so much of it that, she doesn't want it anymore, right? So going back to supply and demand, I absolutely agree with what you just said in the fact that if, in fact, again, let's just assume that that's the case, that the higher price has more options. I had had a dinner with college friends, 50-year-old college friends, a few weeks ago, and we were talking about the dearth of places where folks my age can downsize into a community. And that's why you see the White Gables, the Kenridge, those are just, Ednam, all those just get, the cottages at Glenmore, all those just get bought up right away.
Immediately.
Because there's just not enough supply. And there's a huge demand, right? So using the example of, in this situation, condo living, because that's what we're talking about, if there's more things at the higher end, and I can tell you right now, I have a friend a fraternity brother of mine who wants to move back to Charlottesville, and we're watching the condo market. Very little in the 500 to 800,000 range is available right now.
Denise Ramey's got a listing in Kenridge right now, a townhome at $975.
Right.
$975.
Right. And so, but the point being is that's
vertical.
That's a vertical.
Yeah.
Right. And some people, even with the elevator, some people don't want the vertical. But anyway, the point being is, if this person can buy that top end, then their house becomes available, right? And when that house gets sold, then the person who bought it and so it can trickle down to the first-time home buyer in the fact that finally there's enough for second, third, and fourth home buyers to buy, right? And I think that is the case. But I think, again, it goes back to, can somebody substantiate and show us, not from Missouri, but show us, right, that by doing this, we're going to have, okay, let's all agree that we're going to have availability. That's what we just said. But are we going to have affordability, right? That's what I can't figure out the numbers where the affordability comes into this. You hope at the end of the day that there's enough supply that people begin to say, no, I'm not going to pay that price. But this is another thing that we have to think about as it relates to Charlottesville. Charlottesville, not anywhere else in the country. Maybe there are other places, but in Charlottesville, there are a lot of people that come in here who went to the university, want to come back to Charlottesville, relive the good old days, sing the good old song, and they're going to pay whatever because they're coming from San Francisco, they're coming from New York, they're coming from New Jersey, whatever. They're going to pay cash, right? And so that whole supply and demand thing doesn't work because those folks are in a position where they have the cash to just go do it. And Woody, being on the show, will be the first one to tell you that when they come in and pay cash, they oftentimes pay more than the house is worth. And therefore, that becomes a comp. And so when the next person puts their house on the market, they go to that comp, and all of a sudden you have this inflated pricing. And because of that, I think that creates a whole nother discussion that I don't hear people talking about, is that a lot of these people who are buying homes from outside of here with cash. They're not, I mean, not that there aren't people buying homes that live here and work here. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying we have a preponderance of people and that's why the value of homes in Charlottesville is significantly higher than Richmond, even though Richmond's the state capital, right? You can buy a lot more house for the same money in Richmond than you can in Charlottesville because of this inflationary scenario where people just come in and they pay this money and there's no appraisals that need to be done to determine the fair market value of it.
I know you want to jump in, Roy.
Well, I think you're right about supply and demand. I mean, Michael, you were correct in what you said, but what we also have
here's the but.
Yeah, okay. Here is the but.
But I respectfully disagree.
Albemarle County and Charlottesville live in the same nutshell.
Yeah.
We're kind of a pea in a pod. We're together. And you know, over the years, the county and the city haven't always agreed on everything.
That's definitely fair.
And then you have UVA in there. That is the engine that's pulling a great deal of that. But in Charlottesville, we have 10 square miles. It's a city that's been around for a couple of hundred years. And what's left to develop is primarily infill. And if I go to a development in Crozet, or I go to a development anywhere in the county where you're developing a tract of land and I can build 50 homes on this development, I have one development manager, I've gone through one permit process, it's a very efficient model to build a lot of homes, or apartments or condos or whatever it might be. But to build those same 50 homes in Charlottesville, in the city, is a tall order because everyone is an individual project. Everyone has different sewer hookups and everyone has a lot of issues. And then the construction cost and just the shortage of labor and skilled labor and builders and contractors. A contractor can say, I'll go build something in Charlottesville, but there's a premium that's added to that because of all the issues having to do with the approval process.
The pain in the tuchus.
Yeah, no kidding.
If you may.
And so there is that premium that you're paying just to do infill construction. It's very expensive. You've got trees to deal with. You've got a lot of things that you don't have to deal when you got a clean piece of dirt. So while
neighbors.
Yeah. Right. And so you do have the premise of supply and demand, if all things being equal, is valid, but you also have to caveat that by saying, yes, but when you're doing infill, it's a whole different ballgame.
That's fair. That's fair. Viewers, and Patricia Irby's watching the program. She says she respects and appreciates hearing both sides of this. Patricia, thank you for watching the program. Got a number of realtors watching the program. Katie Pearl will highlight you. Vanessa Parkhill's watching in Earlysville. Jamie Clark. Christelle, welcome to the program. Viewers and listeners, if you have any comments, put them in the feed. We'll relay them live on air. Should we talk?
Jerry, let me just one other thing in regards to what Roy was talking about as it relates to this whole aspect of the supply and demand, and again, it really is about highest and best use, right? Highest and best use, and with this zoning ordinance, again, the highest and best use changes.
It does,
right? It changes, sure. and so the supply and demand changes. Right, and so the highest and best use, if I can put 8 units on there and get an RI, say it's a development, it's a rental, obviously if it's 8 units, it's probably going to be a rental scenario. And I can, well, as an example, I know of somebody who built a building who put on the top floor apartments. UVA immediately went to them and tried to rent all of them for traveling nurses at UVA Hospital, right? That is a more expensive rent than just the normal 1 year because it's short term and because people need something close, that kind of thing. So the demand is there for that as well. Let's not forget the rental aspect of this. And again, kudos to Sam Sanders and his staff for wanting to change things, but many of you who follow me on Facebook know that we just renovated a house. And are moving into a house to age in place, right? Wide doorways, so me with the walker and the wheelchair, whatever, can get in, no step showers, that kind of stuff. It took 8 months to do it, right? Now, part of it was because of the city, because of inspections and things like that, and I really do believe things are getting better in regards to that. But going back to what Roy just said, the builder that did it for us was coming into Charlottesville, and ours was one of the first things he did. He had no idea what he was getting into as it related to the city and the cost of labor versus Richmond, which is where he spent most of his time, you know? So again,
plus the carrying cost for you.
Yeah, well, again, and not all that worked out. My only point about that is just supporting what Roy said, that people who are doing this don't have any idea until they get into it.
Right.
The additional costs and time, cost of money, cost of time. And just real quickly, shout out to my buddy Mark Duffner. Mark's a good high school friend and is senior defense consultant for the Cincinnati Bengals. So the fact he's taken time away to listen to this show means a great. They had a big win Sunday, so maybe he's got the day off. I don't know, but shout out to my buddy Mark. But anyway, the point being is you do need to understand that the city and this area is different than in other places.
So I'll highlight some of the viewers and listeners, then pass it to you.
Sure.
Vanessa Parkhill's watching in Earlysville. She says the affordability comes in when new builds are required to have X number of affordable rental units. Michael highlighted this. The rest of the market is left to make up the difference, which is a huge hit punch to the first-time home buyer. Michael highlighted this. Vanessa Parkhill also says Charlottesville's not operating in a true supply and demand situation because council dictates some of the prices. Lisa Costello is watching on Cherry Avenue. My dad bought this 2-bedroom, 1-bath house for $12,500 in 1964. That's the house she's in now. I told my next door neighbor if he wants to pay me the $2,100 he is paying for a similar house, he can have mine as long as he lets me pitch a tent with a porta potty in the backyard. She says Dad's mortgage was $120 a month. Yes, that was more than it is now, but still $120 a month. Basically, she's highlighting how prices have skyrocketed while wages have not at the same clip. And that's not just for Charlottesville, but that's also nationally. I'll throw open-ended anywhere you want to go. I do want to highlight the covenants and restrictions that I'm hearing happening around here, and I would love to highlight the cause and effect with you, Michael. You're a real estate expert on how you could see upzoning, the impact it could have in Albemarle County in the urban ring and in HOA neighborhoods around Albemarle, because I think it's going to lead even more demand to those areas as people want the backyard and the white picket fence. First, open-ended to Roy.
Well, I agree. Yes, I've been in discussions with several groups that are working with their attorneys to put some covenants and restrictions on their property as far as a street or a neighborhood. And it's a tough question to ask somebody to voluntarily place their house and and give up those development rights, because especially in some of our challenged neighborhoods, for a lot of people, this is their retirement.
Yeah.
And
Not kind of.
Yeah, it is their retirement.
It is their investment.
Yes,
it's their
absolutely.
biggest investment
No
they've
doubt,
made in
no
their
doubt.
life. And if I could sell something for $500,000,
For 3 to 4x more than the actual value because of the upside.
exactly.
Yeah, that's
So
what you're saying.
Why take away that opportunity for wealth creation just because you're trying to do something altruistic for the entire neighborhood? It's a very tough question, but it's one that is being asked. And I think that there's a lot of people who want to live in a single-family residential neighborhood with maybe an ADU or another apartment or something behind, but not blow up their neighborhood. And I think that's a fair thing. People bought in and said, this is what I'm buying, and this is the environment I'm living in, and we can modify some things, but don't ask me to voluntarily blow up my neighborhood. And I think that's honest too. The affordability, if it were easy, like Michael said, we're competing not only for in-town growth, we're competing against people that want to leave New York, want to leave San Francisco, and that have money, and they want to live near town, and you can't compete financially against that person. And so...
Our neighbors sold a Georgetown townhome for top dollar, still work at 2 DC firms, husband and wife, moved down to Albemarle County, purchased a very beautiful home, put a significant amount of money into it, still had a bag of money left over, and now are working from their basement through an ISP for their firms up there, but living in Albemarle County.
It's a different world, and it's a challenging thing. And without land, you cannot build inexpensive housing that is affordable in infill. It's just kind of an oxymoron. And I know everybody wants that result. That's what everybody agrees on is the result. It's the means by how you get to that result. And that's the reason why in the Planning Commission public hearing, there were 115 speakers, and it was almost divided 50-50.
It was pretty close.
It was. And the same thing with the City Council public hearing. The city has done an inadequate job, I think, about bringing the community together. And I think it's kind of pitted one against the other, and one is saying, well, affordable housing, and it's all about welcoming. And then it puts another group on the defensive saying, no, I just think the plan is wrong. And that doesn't mean that either is right or completely wrong, but it's very divisive in this town. And there's a lot of, I would say, resignation that the city's just going to take over their neighborhoods, and it's not a healthy thing.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about what Roy just said. That for me, you being here for this last hour, it really resonated with me that one of the fixes is this covenants and restrictions, but am I going to handcuff myself for the 10 years I'm going to live here? Or what, God forbid, something happens and somebody passes away, and now I want to sell my house, and yet I've now determined that my house is only going to be sold for this amount versus, X. So that's a fascinating thought process. But in answer to your other question, Jerry, as far as the urban ring, I think the urban ring benefits incredibly by this. And the reason I mean that is if, for whatever reason, when this zoning ordinance is passed, regardless of what language they put in there for reviews and things like that, which I hope they will do, and we haven't even gotten to the whole, rent 99-year, that kind of thing. And we probably won't. I don't really understand that as much, but I do understand that it's another thing that would be on the city's plate. And hopefully, as you said, they staff up. But the city hasn't done a great job in that area in regards to complying, having the staff to do the compliance and the inspections and all those kind of things for these rentals that are going to be a part of this, right? That's a whole nother, how is that going to be, people are going to be made sure, or are they going to be sure that that's going to be handled well? But if, in fact, and when it does get passed and somebody like Roy says, I'm going to sell before that happens, where's he going to go? Well, if he enjoys being close and convenient to Charlottesville, he's going to move back to the county and have in a situation where he can protect and have what he wants, right? And so that's not going to help affordability in the urban ring. That's going to increase the pricing because there's
There's
gonna
more
be
demand.
more demand,
Yeah.
right? And not enough supply. So,
Yeah.
all of these things, and Roy said something to me on my show that was really helpful. We need UVA, Albemarle, Charlottesville banding together in this situation and trying to figure it out together, because it's 10 square miles and then there's, X. And then, as we all know, Albemarle only has a certain percentage of growth area. Well, maybe Albemarle needs to expand that a little bit so that they increase, affordability, and those kind of things should all be coming together versus each one of them operating in their own silos.
5% of Albemarle County allocated for development. We've had a handful of Board of Supervisors sitting where Michael and Roy are sitting, saying they're not going to expand the 5% until the current 5% is at capacity. Now, I will say this, Michael Pruitt, elected to the Board of Supervisors, he's very much in favor of expanding the developmental area in Albemarle County. However, you have to get to 4 votes. There's 6 supervisors. You got to get to 4 votes. A 3-3 vote is a tie, and that means it does not pass. So right now, not the political capital to expand the developmental area. Two-part question for you, Roy. A, do you see this being passed before the turn of the calendar? Do you see this being passed in December?
Yes.
At the next meeting?
I think the city council is committed to passing something which it's troubling because we don't know what that passing is.
Yeah. So you see that happening at the next meeting?
They have a work session
They have
Wednesday.
2 left, right?
Yeah, they have a couple of work sessions. I see that they want to finish this up by the end of the year so they can start 24 kind of with that done.
Okay. Neil Williamson has highlighted on this program before that, and Neil, I believe, Neil is watching right now, that this is a evolution and not a revolution, the upzoning, meaning that this is going to be a slow change.
Oh, I
to the city.
agree with that. I agree with Neil's that it's not going to happen all of a sudden. It can't because of the infrastructure in the city. But what I don't agree on is once these different upzonings are passed, you're not going to ever come back. It's going to be, that's the way it's going to be. And so my whole purpose is to let's start slower, let's start a little less aggressive. Just like the mayor said, let's not do the entrance corridor with 10 or 12-story buildings right from the get-go. Let's look into that a little bit. Let's hold it. Let's walk into this a little bit and really consider what do we actually want to do as a community. And I think that's where I come from is let's not let the horse out of the corral right now, but say in 2 years let's look at this, 2 years let's look at that, and that is probably a more measured area. Although the pressure for affordable housing is just going to amp up.
Woody Fincham says he left the assessor's office because they pay nothing. He quadrupled, he says, his salary the first year he left. He said staffing only improves if you pay folks well. Grayson's watching in North Downtown. He's watching the show. He says, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation from start to finish. This is a topic we talk about often in our neighborhood walks with our neighbor. And he also says that he thinks upzoning will breed expensive units for folks that cannot necessarily afford them, except they're out-of-towners with what Jerry calls the big bags of money. This comment's come in from Vanessa, who's watching in Earlysville, and we appreciate your comments, Vanessa. She says, I appreciate Roy's thoughtful willingness to engage in measured change. She also says, more importantly, what is being done to facilitate building of apartments in the Kmart Seminole Square area? This is a perfect, currently underutilized place. Most would be okay with seeing lots of opportunities for housing. Lisa says, having inherited 50% of my house, this is the only reason I am sitting in a single-family house, albeit a small one inside the city. There's no way I could afford to buy this small house on my own. Many homeowners are like me, old Charlottesville, who inherited their house versus newcomers who could afford and do pay any amount to move here. A lot of truth to that.
Jerry, real quick, going back to the Kmart
Absolutely.
and the mall, Fashion Square Mall. I don't know where it is, but in the time frame, I know where it is in the time frame. But Great Eastern Management down along Hillsdale, past Whole Foods, on the right, where the old Giant used to be. People who haven't been here for years don't even know what I'm talking about, because Giant's been gone a long, long time. But they own all that. And one of the keys to Hillsdale being extended all the way to hydraulic was Chuck Rodkin and David Mitchell, worked with the city and the county to create ingress egress there. And the reason being is, if I understand, and Jerry, you may know better than I am, but that's all going to be mixed use, from Whole Foods down to Via, right? That whole shopping center is going to be retail and apartments above. And the cool thing about that is it's on the city public transit. So you're going to have access to, you can go all the way up to the center at Belvedere, or you go into town or whatever. And it seems like it's been a long time coming, but I assume that's still in the works, right?
Yeah, still in the pipe. We haven't talked infrastructure.
Well, that is another issue with infrastructure.
That's what he alludes to here.
Yeah, the infrastructure, it's kind of like that cloud. You can kind of see it, but it's hard to put your hand around it and really understand it. But we have a sewer system with a certain amount of capacity. When you start putting some significant infill or doubling, or even if we increase the capacity of housing in our community by 30%, the sewer system isn't built for that in the street. And it's built with terracotta pipe, and you start tearing that up, and the sewer is at the bottom rung of what's in the street,
Well, let's hope they can do it much faster than they did the intersection at Rugby Avenue.
I know. Well, it's still a work in progress.
Well, I mean, in even more simplistic terms, the city runs the Charlottesville Public School bus system, and they can't get the students to school and home on time with bus drivers. So if we increase density and have more kids on bus routes, and in our current population we can't get the kids to school on buses, how are we going to get more kids to school on buses?
And real quick, in giving the city a bit of the doubt, that has improved immeasurably since school started.
It has improved,
and I can
particularly in the county.
No, I'm talking to the city. I can speak specifically because initially my grandchildren were lucky enough to make the list, and there were only 3 or 4 of them at the bus stop. They're probably 12 or 15 now. So they've obviously increased the capacity, and things are better than they were.
Yeah, that's very true. Very true.
But you're correct. The city and the county is working just on their water supply, and that's a ginormous project to give us the amount of water at Ragged Mountain Reservoir. But then if we have to add on to a school, look at just what Walker's. What the cost of that was, 70, 90 million.
Buford is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
School reconfiguration.
Buford.
Yeah.
And now you say maybe we're going to need a new school, or we're going to tear down a school, and that's a couple of $100 million. That all comes, if you divide it by how many people live in Charlottesville, that's a big number.
Yeah.
That's a big number.
Again, infrastructure, you got transportation, and just going back to the 10-story Truist project. Again, one of the reasons that was deferred, there were a number of reasons, but one of the big reasons have you done the transportation study yet? No. Well, how in the world, and they better be taking transportation as it relates to Old Ivy Road too, because when they put, was it 246?
You know this firsthand. Yeah. How many years did you spend at the Roy Wheeler?
Yeah.
I mean,
still there, yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
I mean, coming out, try taking a left over at Borset after you're playing some squash and trying to go to Crozet, or taking a right.
Or taking a left out of White Gables or Kenridge across from Birdwood.
You could spend 10 minutes there.
The only way you can get out of there is by the courtesy of people that are coming.
No, the only way to get out of there is
to risk your life.
No, is to turn right
and then
come up to my neighborhood where the light is, our office, and do the U-turn and get back on again.
Right. Yeah.
But my point being is 246 units there across from Faulkner, right, on Old Ivy Road and getting on 29, and then you put that structure at the corner of Massey and Ivy Road. That whole transportation study is not just about that corner, it's about that whole corridor, because UVA has bought, at some point, Food of All Nations is going to have to move, probably.
They're under a long-term lease. UVA paid $20 million for Ivy Square Shopping Center, but we all know the future of Ivy Square Shopping Center is not in its current form, to your point.
And so from there all the way down under the bridge, the one-lane bridge that's
Yeah.
going to get people to, first, to have a wonderful meal at IVN, but then second, to get down to those apartments and to try to get on to 29 to go back home. I mean, that whole corridor is, I mean, they've done a bunch of it, for the University of Police, and they've expanded all that with the orthopedic center and stuff, but that part after that, that's a huge infrastructure issue.
Fantastic points from Michael Guthrie. Gentlemen, an hour and 7 minutes flies by when you're sitting at a table like this with astute stakeholders like yourselves. How about some closing thoughts? Roy will go with our esteemed guest first. Some closing thoughts.
Well, I love this city. I love Charlottesville, and I've watched it grow, and I am very open personally to affordable housing and finding solutions. I just think this current plan is too ambitious and too. It's hard to bank on this for the future.
Also,
Yeah.
Michael.
Again, just my whole point over this last 4 to 6 weeks on my show and here being Keith's sub is trying to make you understand what's actually happening and encouraging you to get engaged. Even in these last few weeks, to reach out on whichever side of the equation you're on, to reach out and support or reach out against, and give them reasonable data. I heard Creed Deeds, our state senator today. I thought this was a great point. He said, "I'm only as good as the information I get." He said, "I have made mistakes in my 30-some years," because he was delegate before his state senator. "I've made mistakes in my 30 years because I didn't have all the information." So he said, "Don't assume that I have the information. Give it to me. Let me know what you think. Give me." So that's what we need to do. We need to be giving folks information. That's what I've been trying to do. Give people information that maybe they haven't thought about. But most importantly, get engaged. And even if when it does get approved, let's just call it as it is, when it does get approved, that doesn't mean you stop. Now it's about, okay, you've approved it, now you got to figure out how to implement it. Get involved in that, making sure that they think about ways that they can implement this that takes into account a lot of the things that Roy has spent so much time working on. And again, all of us want affordability, all of us want availability, but not at the cost of things just being total chaos because we haven't put the infrastructure and haven't thought about these other aspects of the financial, repercussions of it. It could be very positive and it could turn into, exactly what everybody wants. But I just think, to use that line, the jury's still out on that. The people that have been watching this over the last few years say there's not enough data yet. They think that there's going to be a positive impact, but more research needs to be done.
Well said, gentlemen. Easy peasy show for a host like me with guys like you here. Hour and 10 minutes on the program. Michael Guthrie, Real Estate Matters. His reputation speaks for itself. 1070 WINA, a stakeholder of documented proportions here and in Charlottesville and Central Virginia. And Roy is just absolutely fantastic. He, as Vanessa Parkhill has said, brings a measured approach, a thought-out approach, a well-researched approach. And all we want to be is the water cooler here of conversation where you, the viewer and listener, can hear both sides of what's happening. So for Roy and Michael and our esteemed producer and director, Judah Wickhauer,
thanks,
who
Judah.
allows us
Thank
to
you,
do
Judah.
what
Yes.
we enjoy doing, which is talking about things we're passionate about. Thank you, Judah. This is Real Talk with Keith Smith. It's archived at realtalkwithkeithsmith.com. The I Love Seville show is up in 1 hour and 5 minutes, where we'll continue the local chatter on topics that are important to you. Thank you kindly for joining us. We'll see you in 1 hour and now 4 minutes. Take care. Well done, guys. That was
Yeah,
easy
thank you.
peasy.
Thank you very much.
And he's going to tell us when the mics are on.